Hi Year 11 and welcome to your second lesson this week. Hopefully you've already attended that live lesson on Monday and so all of this will be nice and familiar to you. If not, don't worry, everything you need to know will be covered within this video. The last three lessons we looked at those three key cycles, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle and the water cycle. And now we're going to start to put that to use and put it into context of a wider environmental system. And today we're going to look at ecosystems. So those of you that do geography, lots of this will be familiar to you. But if not, we're going to start at the basics and we're going to start by looking at what an ecosystem is. So ecosystems are made up of various levels and we're going to look at those levels now, and this involves me drawing some pictures. I promise you this was one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. Though I appreciate the rabbits do not look like rabbits, but honestly I've lost the will to live at that point. The first level of an ecosystem is the individual, which is why I'm drawing just a single rabbit. A single individual within an ecosystem might play a much bigger part, a much wider part in that ecosystem, or it may not be part of it at all. But we need to look at things on an individual level. Next level up is population, and that is the entirety of that species. So this rabbit here, it's all of the rabbits within that ecosystem rather than just the one rabbit we saw previously. The next level up from population is the community, and this is all the species within the ecosystem. So it's not just the rabbits, it's the foxes, the birds, but it's also all the plant species as well that I just could not be bothered to draw. And then finally, we can look at the entire ecosystem. And an ecosystem is the interdependence and the relationship between all the living and non-living factors. So it's all those species we talked about in community, but it's also the non-living factors like the water, the soil, the oxygen in the air. All of these things have an effect on that wider ecosystem. So all organisms within one of these ecosystems compete for different resources. And when we think about animals, this might mean physically competing, fighting for a mate, or fighting for territory, or fighting for the best food supply. But plants compete as well. They compete for light, they compete for space, they compete for nutrients. And the reason that trees grow very, very tall is the tallest trees get the most amount of light and so can continue to grow and continue to thrive. There is this competition within all species within an ecosystem. All these different resources that species are competing for within an ecosystem can be nicely categorized into one of two ways. They are either abiotic factors, and these are non-living factors, things like the soil, things like water, things like heat, things that are not living. And they are also biotic factors, and these are living factors that affect the population and community within an ecosystem. And for this, it's things like predator-prey relationships, which we'll look at later on in this course. It's things like diseases and bacteria which might spread between a population. These factors, both abiotic and biotic, can have a huge effect on the entire ecosystem. Making a small change to the amount of water available can have a huge knock-on effect. Just as making a small change to an individual, that basic level of the ecosystem, can have a larger effect on the population, which can have an effect on the community, which can destroy an entire ecosystem. You think that first person that ate that first bat, that was just an individual, but it's had an entire knock-on effect to the population of the world, which will have had an effect on the food chain in one way or another, which will in turn have had an effect on our entire global ecosystem. If you think back to the nitrogen and carbon cycle last week, making a small change to a abiotic factor like the amount of nitrogen, less nitrogen means less plant growth, and that means that that bottom level of the food chain is removed, and fewer plants means that there'll be fewer animals and the entire food chain collapses very quickly. And this is how ecosystems can collapse. You take out a small link in that chain and the entire thing falls in on itself. And as we continue to look at this unit, we'll look more at that delicate balance that is within an ecosystem and how everything is interdependent on one another. Good, so that was a relatively short lesson this week because we'll look at ecology and ecosystems much more in the coming weeks. This is sort of just a little bit of an introduction, and it's really important that you're happy with and familiar with these terms before we move forward and look in greater detail. So make sure you do the Google questions now. There'll be an extension task this week for those of you that want it, which will be a little bit of revision on some of the topics you might have done in year 10 or the start of year 11. So if you find this a little bit easy and you've got a little bit too much free time on your hands, go ahead and do those extension tasks. It will all count towards your final grade in the end. So I hope you all have a great week. Thanks very much.